Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. Let's jump right into things. Last week, we had talked about the whole live and let live mindset. This soft, feels good, hands-off approach to life that sounds great until you realize what it's really done to society. It's let some of the loudest, most sanctimonious people on our planet take over every corner of public life. And that is what brings us to today's episode. Because if live and let live was the open door, then the woke scolds were the ones who kicked it down and they set up shop in the living room. And you know exactly who I'm talking about. The type of people who think that they are the moral guardians of society. The folks who believe that they're saving the world by shaming strangers online or canceling anyone, including friends and family, who dare to disagree with them. The very people who use phrases like do better or educate yourself as weapons, not advice. The ones who always look at you with a sideways glance if you didn't post the black square on your Instagram profile back in 2020. Yeah, those people. And they call it justice. They call it progress. But what it really is control. It's a form of moral narcissism, this really backwards belief that their worldview is so enlightened, so perfect, that you don't even deserve the right to question it. And that, my friends, is the root of woke scolding. It's not about compassion. It's about compliance. It's about using guilt, shame, and fear to make people fall in line. And what's wild is that it's worked, at least for a while. See, for most of the 2010s, these folks had total cultural dominance. They took over the media, entertainment, corporations, and yeah, even the government. And the rest of us were told to live and let live, to just let them do their thing. But as it turns out, their thing meant rewriting the rules for everyone else. Yes, the rest of society. And people went along with it because nobody wanted to be labeled. Nobody wanted to be called the bad names. Nobody wants to be called racist. No one wants to be called sexist or anti-this or anti-that. So we stayed quiet. We told ourselves, not my fight. This will blow over. But it didn't. It grew. And by the time the 2020s hit, the woke scolds weren't just yelling at you from Twitter or Instagram anymore. They were shaping national policy. They were on your TV telling you which businesses were essential and which gatherings were allowed. And if you dared to question the logic, you weren't just wrong. You were dangerous. You remember this, right? The follow the science crowd. Right before telling us that mass protests in the middle of the pandemic were suddenly necessary for public health. Stay home, save lives, unless, of course, you're chanting the right religious slogans. And by religious, I mean social slogans. See, this is peak absurdity. And for a lot of people, it was the moment that the mask actually came off, both literally and figuratively. Because the woke scolds weren't heroes. They were hypocrites. Because they didn't care about science. They don't care about fairness or even the truth. What they cared about was enforcing a moral hierarchy that put them at the top and everyone else beneath them. And that's exhausting. People today are tired of being lectured. They're tired of watching common sense get replaced by whatever new buzzword someone came up with on TikTok. They're tired of pretending that shouting inclusion while then banning ideas is somehow virtuous. But there's good news. We're seeing the death of the woke scold in real time. Their influence is fading, their grip on culture is slipping, and the same companies that pandered to them are quietly backing away. The same celebrities who preach to us are now being ignored, and the same media outlets that used to parrot their talking points have lost credibility day by day. People are waking up, pun intended. They're realizing that people claiming moral superiority were just using that power to silence dissent. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. So today, we're going to talk about how this all happened, how the woke scold mentality took root, how it got supercharged by the live and let live crowd, how it affected every major institution, and how it all started to crumble once people saw how fake it actually was. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what comes next. Because now that the woke scolds are losing their grip, we've got a real chance to rebuild. But we've got to do this the right way, with courage, truth, and frankly, a willingness to fight back when we're told to sit down and shut up. This episode isn't about mocking the woke crowd, though let's be honest, it's going to be fun. It's about understanding how they rose to power, why they fell, and how we can make sure they never get this kind of power again. Because the death of the woke scolds isn't just a cultural payback. This is an opportunity to bring sanity back to our society, to rebuild moral confidence without turning into moral tyrants, and to remind people that liberty only survives when we stop letting self-righteous hall monitors tell us how to live. So if we're going to talk about the death of the woke scolds, we need to first rewind and ask, where did the woke scolding even come from? Because the whole thing didn't just pop out of nowhere. Wokeism didn't suddenly appear one day in 2020 like some kind of cultural mushroom after a storm. No, this mindset was building for decades. It's slowly been seeping into our schools, into our media, and eventually every part of our daily life. And let's start back in the universities, because that's really where the seed was planted. Go back to the 60s, the 70s, even the 80s and 90s, and you're going to see all of these ideas bubbling up in academia. Critical theory, intersectionality, white privilege, systematic this, systematic that. And see, these weren't kitchen table conversations. These were grad school theories. Professors wrote about power structures and oppression hierarchies, breaking society down into oppressors and oppressed. And in that environment, everything became political. Nothing could be neutral. Every word, every decision, every institution had to be reinterpreted through the lens of power and oppression. See, now most people back then didn't really pay much attention to this because, really, who cares what a couple of professors and some woke students are arguing about on college campuses? It all feels abstract. The problem is that those ideas didn't stay in the ivory tower, though. They trickled out because students graduate and then they become teachers or journalists or HR reps or artists. And they carry this new worldview with them into the real world. And then came social media. And this was the gasoline on the fire because suddenly these ideas that used to stay trapped in seminar rooms were blasted to millions of people instantly. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook rewarded outrage. They made gotcha moments go viral, and they gave a microphone to anyone who could frame themselves as a victim and then shame someone else as the oppressor. And that's where the performance side of wokeism was born. It wasn't enough to believe something privately. You had to perform it publicly, loudly, and constantly. And that's how we got to the whole virtue signaling Olympics. Remember the early days? People posting hashtags and rainbow flags on every profile picture? Like people competing to see who could be the most aware and the strongest ally, the most inclusive. Picture this. You wake up one day and the government has frozen your bank account. Your money? Gone. Sounds crazy, I know. Ask people in Argentina or even Canada how real that can be. And that's why you absolutely need to check out the Expat Money Online Summit, October 10th through October 12th. And it's hosted by my good buddy, Mikel Thorup. It's a free online event packed with experts teaching all about how to protect your wealth, secure a second residency, slash your taxes, and buy property abroad. And this year's spotlight is on Latin America. So Argentina, El Salvador, Panama, Paraguay, places opening doors right now for people smart enough to walk through. And by the way, your free ticket is waiting at expatmoneysummit.com. And if you want VIP access with replays and exclusive panels, use promo code TBNS for 20% off your upgrade. One more time, that's expatmoneysummit.com, promo code TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show. And let's be real, some of that probably came from good intentions. Some folks probably thought, hey, I'm standing up for fairness. But what happened was that this morphed quickly into something else. It became a game of moral one-upmanship. It became a way to score political and social points and gain social status. And this is where the woke scold archetype really emerged. It wasn't just, hey, I'm aware of injustice. It was, I'm more aware than you, and if you're not on my level, you're part of the problem. It was, educate yourself. It was, do better. It was, check your privilege. It was never an invitation to learn. It was always an accusation, and the accusation always came with consequences. Think about how quickly cancel culture became a household term. A comedian makes a joke from 10 years ago, boom, canceled. A worker posts something politically incorrect, and then they're fired. A business doesn't issue the approved statement during the latest outrage cycle, boycotted. See, the mentality was directly tied to this new ideology that grew out of the academy, spread by the media, and amplified by social platforms. Now, let's add one more piece here. Institutions. See, the woke scolds got real power when corporations, schools, government agencies, they all started adapting their language. And they did it because they were terrified. They didn't want to be the target of the next outrage mob. So what'd they do? They bought into it. They hired consultants. They built the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. They required mandatory training sessions where employees were told to confess your privilege and, of course, check those boxes. See, this was a turning point when wokeism stopped being just an online game and became policy. When it wasn't just hashtags, but actual job requirements. When it wasn't just activists demanding compliance, but now it was your HR department. And here's the irony, by the way. Most regular people still weren't fully on board. The average mom and dad in suburbia, let's say, they're not reading, Kimberly Crenshaw or Judith Butler. They weren't obsessed with identity politics. But they went along with it because they felt trapped or they just didn't know. The live and let live mentality kicked in. People thought, it's just not worth the fight. Just sign the pledge, do the training, post the hashtag, move on. And every time we moved on, the woke scolds gained more power. They gained more ground. And by the mid-2010s, it was everywhere. Hollywood made it part of the brand. Sports teams literally and figuratively bent the knee. Schools were rewriting their curriculum. Corporations adopted the woke slogans. And suddenly, if you weren't fluent in the latest activist wokenese, you weren't just out of touch. You were a moral threat. And that's how the woke scolds got their start. Not through persuasion, not through winning open debates, but through creeping into the culture under the radar, using guilt, shame, and fear as their weapons. Goodness, they sound like the Sith. And it all began as theory, by the way, and then it became fashionable, and then it becomes law. And if you're wondering why people were so exhausted by the wokeism, especially nowadays, this is why. Because the foundation of the woke scold movement was never about genuine compassion or equality or equity. It was about building a moral hierarchy where certain voices counted more than others. And when you build a movement on shame and status, it doesn't take long before the cracks start to show. So when we talk about the death of the woke scolds, remember, this wasn't an accident. They rose because normal people let them rise. They took power because too many of us thought that just simply ignoring them would make them eventually go away. And they're only dying now because enough people finally got fed up with being preached to by hypocrites. So that's where the woke scolds came from. And now that we know the origin story better, we can now better understand how it grew, but also how it peaked and now why it's collapsing. So the next question is, well, how did it actually take over? How did wokeism, a fringe ideology, become the dominant force in media, business, entertainment, and even in our government? Well, the truth is that the woke scolds didn't seize power by convincing everybody, or frankly anybody, really. They didn't win hearts and minds in open debate. They won again by weaponizing fear. They won by creeping into institutions quietly and then making it costly for anyone to push back. And once they had just a little bit of leverage, they used it to take over as much as they could. See, the first major foothold they grabbed was in HR departments. And that might sound boring, but it was a brilliant strategy. Because think about it. If you can control hiring and firing, you control the culture. By the early 2010s, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives were popping up everywhere. They started small, a seminar here, a consultant there, but over time, they grew into entire bureaucracies. And suddenly, every company had mandatory trainings where employees were told to examine your privilege, confess your unconscious biases, and of course, pledge allegiance to whatever the new corporate-approved values were. And if you didn't, Well, maybe you didn't get fired right away, but you got labeled. You got flagged as a difficult employee, not a team player. And in a corporate environment, that's basically career death. So what happens? Well, most people just went along with it. Live and let live. Not worth the fight. The second foothold was in media. See, legacy outlets like the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, lots of the Hollywood studios, they bought into the woke script because they were terrified of being on the wrong side of history, or really the wrong side of a Twitter mob. So they didn't want to be called racist or sexist. So instead of pushing back, they handed the microphone over. They let the activists set the language. They said, hey, you can dictate the framing. You can even write the rules of what can and can't be said. And that's how we ended up with phrases like fiery, but mostly peaceful protests. That's how we ended up with news anchors lecturing regular Americans about pronouns while ignoring stories that, actually mattered to real people's lives. See, it wasn't about journalism anymore. It was about controlling a narrative. And the woke scolds were the ones running the show. The third place they took over was not just the universities, but more importantly, like the lower levels of education. We're not talking about universities. We're talking about K-12 schools. Suddenly, parents were coming home and seeing homework assignments from their kids, asking them about gender identity or teaching them to see each other as primarily oppressed or oppressor types of personas. Critical race theory and gender ideology wasn't staying in seminar rooms anymore. They were being spoon-fed to kids in elementary school, kindergartners. What? And again, most parents didn't notice at first, but when they did, the fight at the school board meetings just showed how deeply this ideology had embedded itself into education. Parents had the FBI called on them. Think about that. Now, once the woke scolds had HR, media, and education under their belt, it was only a matter of time before they gained real political power. And politicians saw the writing on the wall. They see these activists mobilizing online, generating the headlines, and creating the viral moments. So instead of pushing back, they jumped on board. You had senators and congresspeople kneeling in kente cloth. You had city councils slashing police budgets while crime skyrocketed. You had government agencies issuing statements written in the same buzzwords that you'd find at an activist blog like the Huffington Post. And let's not forget about those big old corporations, because for a while, big companies thought that they could buy their way out of trouble by parroting the woke slogans. I mean, remember when every major brand turned their logo into a rainbow for the Pride Month? Or when every company suddenly had Black Lives Matter banners on their homepages in 2020? That wasn't organic. It was all corporate risk management because they figured, it's easier to appease the woke mob than it is to fight it. The problem is, once you start feeding the beast doesn't go away. The beast gets hungrier. The beast gets bigger. See, this entire rise was built on intimidation, not inspiration. People weren't lining up because they truly believed in this ideology. They were lining up because they were terrified of being labeled, of being fired, of being shamed. See, the woke scolds used that fear to create the illusion of consensus. And once people saw through the illusion, they thought, well, I guess this is just how things are now. It's like the emperor's new clothes. Everybody could see the nonsense, but nobody wanted to say it first, because if you say it out loud, the second you did, the mob came for you. See, that's why the woke scolds got as far as they did. Not because they were strong, but because so many of us were weak and we stayed silent. We thought, just ignoring it might go away, like ignoring cancer. But in reality, ignoring it gave it life. Live and let live turned into live and let them run the show. So how did the woke scolds take power? Simple. They didn't win it. They bullied their way into it. They exploited silence, and they used guilt as a weapon. They wrapped it all in languages of compassion so that if you resisted, you looked like the bad guy. That's how they went from being fringe activists to setting the rules for the rest of us. But there's good news. Because their rise wasn't built on genuine conviction, their hold on power isn't sustainable. See, when people start losing their fear, when they realize, hey, I'm not alone in rejecting this woke bullshit, the whole illusion begins to crumble. And next, we're going to talk about how 2020 was the year it all came to a head. See, this was the year that the mask came off. This was the year that the woke scolds hit their high water mark. And ironically, it was also the year they exposed themselves as the complete hypocrites and bullies in such an obvious way that millions of people finally woke up to what was actually happening. See, in early 2020, the world shut down. COVID hit, and then overnight, the rules changed. Remember the whole 2 weeks to slow the spread narrative? Remember the constant drumbeat, stay home, save lives, don't see your family, don't open your business, don't question the science. People lost jobs. Kids lost classrooms, and small businesses that have been around for decades shut their doors forever. And if you dared to push back, if you asked questions, if you pointed out inconsistencies, sorry, you're not just wrong, you're anti-science and you wanted people to die. Who was at the front of this shaming campaign? Who was it? Oh, the woke scolds. They turned public health into a moral crusade. It wasn't about common sense precautions anymore. It was about obedience. Wear that mask. Stay 6 feet apart. Close your church. Not because it made rational sense, but because it showed you were virtuous. Because you were a good rule follower. It shows you care. And if you didn't comply, if you wanted to live normally, or God forbid, go to work, well, sorry, then you are selfish, you are reckless, and you are putting people's lives at risk. But then something happened, and it exposed just how hollow all of this nonsense actually was. George Floyd was killed, and protests erupted all over the country. Now, regardless of where you stand on the specifics, here's what everyone saw. The same experts who told you that gathering in groups would kill grandma suddenly declared that thousands of people marching shoulder to shoulder was necessary for public health. What? Yes, the same governors who shut down schools and churches applauded crowds smashing into cities. The same journalists who scolded you for visiting your family defended riots as fiery but mostly peaceful. Do you see the insanity yet? On Monday, going to church was reckless. On Tuesday, looting a Target was a moral duty. On Wednesday, family barbecues were a super spreader event. And on Thursday, chanting in a mob was socially healing. And the woke scolds didn't just roll with it. They enforced it. If you pointed out the hypocrisy, they came for you. How dare you compare your haircut to racial justice? You're trying to stay sharp, whether it's for work, learning, or just not forgetting where you left your keys. Been there. But lately, the mental fog hits hard. And brain fog isn't just stress. It's often tied to poor blood flow and low nitric oxide levels because your brain needs oxygen just as much as your other muscles do. Because without it, you're slower to process, less focused, and more fatigued. And that's one of the many reasons why I trust Cardio Miracle. Not only does it boost nitric oxide for heart and circulation, it supports cognitive clarity, focus, and even mood regulation thanks to its unique blend of L-arginine, CoQ10, vitamin D3, and antioxidant-rich superfoods. So if you're tired of feeling mentally cloudy, give your brain what it's craving. Click the link in the show notes, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS, which will give you 15% off your order. Just look for the little note on the website saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show. How dare you put property above people's lives? But let's be clear, this wasn't about people's lives. This was about politics. This was about ideology. And here's where they really overplayed their hand. For years, the woke scolds had hidden behind the mask of compassion. They claimed, we're just fighting for fairness, for equality, for equity, for progress. But 2020 showed what it was all really about. Power. The rules didn't apply universally. The rules applied when it served their agenda, and then the rules disappear when it doesn't. Think about the symbolism. Churches were shut down, but riots, they were fine. They were greenlit. Small businesses were closed, but Amazon thrived. Schools stay locked down, but Hollywood celebrities lectured us from their mansions. See, every rule was selectively enforced, and everyone could see it. And once you see it, again, you can't unsee it. And then came the social media enforcement squad. Going back to those black squares on Instagram. Remember how overnight it became mandatory to post your allegiance to a movement? And if you didn't, if you hesitated, if you stayed quiet, you were branded as complicit. Silence is violence, they said. Imagine that. In the middle of a pandemic and all the riots, people were forced to prove their loyalty online by posting a black box. And if you didn't, the mob came for you. See, that's when the woke scolds reached their peak arrogance, because they weren't just calling out racism or sexism or whatever sexy-ism of the day they were going after. What they were doing was demanding ritual displays of compliance. They were deciding who was on the right side of history and who was the heretic. And they believed that they had the power to ruin you if you dare resist. See, that very arrogance is what started to unravel their power. Millions of people who had gone along quietly, who had lived and let live for years, suddenly looked around and thought, dude, this is insane, because none of this makes sense. They saw their kids locked out of schools while mobs packed into the streets. They saw small businesses destroyed while big corporations pandered with empty, meaningless slogans. And they saw their neighbors canceled for not posting hashtags while rioters were literally burning down neighborhoods. That was the proverbial red pill moment for a lot of folks. 2020 exposed the woke scolds as frauds. Their compassion was fake. Their science was political and fake. Their justice was selective and fake. And once that realization hit, their moral high ground collapsed, just like Anakin Skywalker. And listen, I think 2020 was actually the turning point where the woke scolds stopped growing and they started dying. Because after that year, people weren't scared anymore. It's like Kevin McAllister in Home Alone. I'm not afraid anymore. No, they weren't afraid. They were angry. They were exhausted. And they were done pretending that the self-righteous hall monitors were anything other than bullies in virtue signaling costumes. So if you're wondering why the woke scolds are fading away today, why companies are finally backing off, and why more and more people are willing to speak up, it all goes back to 2020. That was the year of insanity. That was the peak of their power, and it was also the moment they exposed themselves as the hypocrites that they actually are. And in doing so, they sowed the seeds of their own downfall. So after 2020, the cracks in the woke scold empire started to show. And for years, they'd been riding high, dictating the rules, canceling people left and right, and then shaming anyone who dared to ask questions. But here's the thing about building a movement on fear. It doesn't last forever. Eventually, people got tired of being afraid, and people stopped caring about those stupid labels and threats. And that's exactly what started happening after 2020. And at first, the backlash was kind of quiet. I mean, maybe you saw it in small moments, like a comedian telling a joke that you weren't supposed to tell anymore, and instead of apologizing, they double down. Or maybe a company refusing to issue a press release every time Twitter demanded it. Parents started whispering to each other at soccer about how their kids were being taught nonsense in school. It wasn't loud yet, but you could feel it bubbling under the surface. By 2021 and 2022, those whispers grew and they got louder. School board meetings became battlegrounds. Parents who'd been silent for years were suddenly showing up, reading the kids' homework right in the public record and saying, nope, not going to happen at our school. And what happened? They got shut down. They were mocked or even labeled by the powers that be as domestic terrorists. Yeah, the DOJ. This has actually happened. But what happened? They kept coming in. The more the woke scolds tried to shame them, the stronger they got. Because regular people saw the absurdity. They saw moms and dads being treated like criminals for caring about their kids. And that, tongue-in-cheek, woke up a lot of people. The backlash hit media, too. Journalists who were tired of towing the line started defecting. You saw the rise of Substack, of independent media voices who said, hey, no, sorry, we're not going to play with this stupid game anymore. And people followed. Because guess what? Folks are hungry for truth, not moral lectures dressed up as reporting. Comedy made a comeback as well. For the first time in years, comedians who were scared to touch certain topics because, everything was off limits, they started to actually do funny jokes. The pendulum swung back. People started realizing that if you can't laugh at life, you're not really free. And when comics began poking fun at woke culture itself, when the sacred cows became punchlines, audiences roared. And that laughter was rebellion. And then came the corporate backlash. Remember when every business felt obligated to slap a rainbow on their logo every June or issue some 12-paragraph statement about the latest social justice issue? Well, by 2023 and 2024, you started to see some of those companies quietly backing off. Why? Well, because people stopped buying into it. Consumers weren't fooled anymore, and they saw it as pandering or faked activism meant to appease the Twitter mobs. And in some cases, customers flat out boycotted brands that pushed too far. Remember the Bud Light boycott? The message was clear. People don't want to be lectured when they're just trying to buy a product. Now, here's the big one. Politics. See, in 2024, the silent voter, the person who had been scared to say anything publicly for fear of being canceled, they finally found their voice at the ballot box. The election results showed just how fed up people were with being told that they were bigots or idiots for not swallowing every woke narrative. The silent majority became the outspoken majority. And it wasn't just about one party or one candidate. It was about rejecting a cultural stranglehold that had gone way, way too far. And this is why it was a backlash. Because it wasn't just a single group or movement. It was culture itself fighting back. And it was everyday people deciding, hey, we're not going to let the moral bullies run our lives anymore. And it's still happening today. You can feel it. The fear that once kept people quiet is gone. Now there's boldness. There's courage. There's energy. See, this backlash isn't about just rejecting the nonsense. And by the way, it's not about rejecting fairness, compassion, or treating people with dignity. Those things matter. They always have. But this is about rejecting hypocrisy. This is about saying no to double standards. It's about refusing to bow to people who claim the moral high ground while standing in quicksand. The woke scolds told us to trust the science while ignoring science when it suited them. They preached tolerance while canceling dissent. They shouted diversity while demanding ideological conformity. And eventually people said, nope, I'm out. Enough. Now, is the battle over? Not even close. The woke scolds aren't gone. They still exist in universities, in media, in government, but their grip on culture is breaking. Their ability to silence opposition is weaker. Their power to shame is fading. And that's a huge win. Because once you lose the fear factor, once people realize you can't actually cancel everyone, the whole house of cards comes crashing down, just like Kevin Spacey's career. And you know what? That's exactly what we're seeing today. The backlash isn't just about tearing down the woke scolds. It's about rebuilding confidence in truth, in common sense, and in shared values. We don't need your permission to speak. We don't need your approval to live. We're done with your labels, and we're not afraid of your mob. The culture is striking back, and the more people who join in, the faster the bullshit crumbles. Now, it's important to remember that just because their influence is fading, it doesn't mean that the fight is over. If we don't actively push back, if we don't continue to learn how to dismantle their arguments, this whole thing could come roaring back just under a different name. So the question is, how do you beat woke scolds? How do you keep them from ever taking control again? Well, the first step is pretty simple. Don't play defense. Woke scolds thrive on putting you in a position where you feel like you've got to justify yourself. They throw out labels like racist and sexist and anti-science. You're a denier. And the second you start scrambling to prove that you're not one of those things, they've already won. Because that's the game. They don't have to actually prove anything. They just point and accuse. And then they watch you trip over yourself trying to defend. So instead of playing their game, just flip it. Ask them to define their terms. When someone says, that's racist, say, what do you mean racist? And then when they call you anti-science, say, well, what do you mean anti-science? Which science? Which study? Which data? And when they use buzzwords like equity or inclusion, ask them to explain what they actually mean and what that looks like in practice. 9 times out of 10, they're not going to have an answer because their power isn't in logic. It's not in reason. It's in emotional intimidation. And the second you drag the argument into clarity, their moral high ground crumbles. Second step, mock them. Mock their absurdity. Use humor. Because one thing the woke scolds can't handle is being laughed at. They rely on fear. They rely on shame. And if you take that power away by pointing out how ridiculous they sound, the entire spell is broken. Think about the mostly peaceful protests while buildings were literally burning on fire behind the reporter in the clip. That clip went viral because people were like, dude, this is laughably insane. That's how you fight back. Humor punctures the balloon faster than anything else. Third step, build communities of courage. One reason the woke scolds gained so much power is that they made people feel isolated. They made you believe you were the only one who thought something was off. And that's how cancel culture works. They wanted you to feel like, sorry, you're all alone. You'd be destroyed if you dare to speak up. But here's the truth. You aren't alone. Millions and millions of people see through this bullshit. And when you connect with others who are willing to speak up, you get stronger. Courage is contagious. And the more of us who stand up, the less scary it gets. Fourth step, stop giving them ground. Too many times normal people try to appease the woke mob. They think, well, maybe if I just use their language, maybe if I just apologize a little tiny bit, maybe if I just stay quiet on this one issue, they'll leave me alone. No, they won't. Appeasement will never satisfy them. It encourages them. It enables them. The way you win is by refusing to cede ground. Speak truth. Don't qualify it with, well, it could be wrong, but no, you say what you believe and you stand firm on it. Fifth step, focus on reality, not ideology. Woke scolds operate in abstract, theoretical, moral language. Things like justice, equity, inclusion, all sounds noble, but it falls apart when you connect it to reality. So don't argue in abstract. Don't argue in theory. Talk about outcomes. Talk about what actually happens when their policies are put in place. So, for example, when they say defund the police, don't get stuck debating buzzwords. Talk about the neighborhoods that got less safe. Talk about the people who suffered. Bring it back to the real world because reality is their kryptonite. And finally, here's the sixth step. And it might be the most important. Live it out yourself. The best way to defeat woke scolds isn't just to argue better. It's to model a better way of living. Show people what it looks like to be free and virtuous at the same time. Be a happy warrior. Raise your kids with strength and kindness. Build communities that actually practice inclusion, real inclusion, not the fake version, the kind where people are welcome as long as they show legitimate, true respect. And when people see an alternative that actually works, the woke ideology loses its appeal. The woke scolds, they're not going to disappear overnight. We know that. They will always have some folks out there who love to lecture, who love to shame, who love to feel morally superior. But what's changing and what you and I can help accelerate is the fact that fewer and fewer of these folks are out there getting attention. And less folks are listening to them. Their power is only as strong as the fear that they can generate. And once people stop being afraid, they've got nothing left. So if you want to know how to beat the woke scolds, it's to be unafraid. Speak truth. Laugh at the absurdity. Build courage with others. Refuse to play defense and live in a way that makes freedom look better than their conformity ever could. Because the reality is that their ideology doesn't sell. Never has. It's only spread because people were too afraid to say no. But now that more of us are actually saying no, the tide is turning. And if we stay bold, if we refuse to bow, if we refuse to take the knee, we can make sure that this nonsense doesn't just die, that it stays dead. All right, so we've walked through the whole journey together from where wokeism came from, how it took power, how it reached its insane peak in 2020, and how the backlash started pushing it back. And here we are today, 2025, in this moment, watching the woke scolds lose their grip. But the story doesn't end here. Because if all we do is sit back and celebrate their collapse, we will miss a far bigger opportunity. The death of the woke scolds isn't the finish line. It's the starting line of rebuilding something better. See, it's not enough just to dismantle bad ideas. You've got to replace them with good ones. Otherwise, that same cultural vacuum that gave us wokeism in the first place will just give rise to another bad ideology down the road. History shows us this time and again. Whenever one toxic worldview crumbles, if there's nothing solid in its place, another one pops up to fill the void. The challenge is to build a society that's strong enough, rooted enough, and confident enough that we don't need to live in fear for the next wave of moral tyrants. And that's where you and I come in. That's where average people come in, because you don't need to be a politician. You don't need to be a media figure. You don't need to run a Fortune 500 company to make a difference. Culture doesn't get rebuilt from the top down. It gets rebuilt from the bottom up. It happens in families, in churches, in neighborhoods, in communities, in schools, in friendships. The very places the woke scolds tried to infiltrate, those are the same places where the rebuilding has to start. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. First, it means reclaiming moral confidence. For too long, we've been told to sit down and shut up, that our values are outdated, that our beliefs are harmful, that the only way to be good is to parrot whatever slogan is trending that week. No, enough of that nonsense. You don't need to feel ashamed of believing in truth, in family, in personal responsibility, in faith, in freedom. These aren't dangerous ideas. They're the foundation of any society worth living in. The first step in rebuilding is standing tall and saying, hey, I'm not afraid to believe in these things. Second, it means teaching courage to the next generation. The woke scolds got as far as they did because kids were taught to see through their worldview, through their lens. And if we want this nonsense gone for good, we've got to raise a generation that knows how to think critically, that can tell the difference between men and women, who can tell the difference between real compassion and fake virtue, that knows liberty requires responsibility. And that means getting involved in your kids' education, paying attention to what's being taught, and then giving them the tools to stand firm when the mob comes knocking. Third, it means creating parallel institutions. When the old institutions got captured by ideology, don't just complain, build new ones. That's already happening, by the way. Independent media is rising. New schools and options like micro schools are opening. Companies that reject woke nonsense are gaining ground. You want to hit the woke scolds? Hit them where it hurts. Support alternatives. Put your money, your time, your energy into organizations that share your values instead of bending to the mob. That's how you starve the beast and you grow something healthier in its place. Fourth, it means normalizing truth again. And I know that sounds simple, but think about how far we've drifted. We live in a world today where saying men can't get pregnant can get you banned on social media, or at least it used to. Where saying riots were bad made you controversial. Where saying basic truths, that was rebranded as hate speech. Part of rebuilding is bringing truth back into the public square without apology. No more whispers. No more tiptoeing around. Speak plainly. Speak confidently. Because when you normalize truth, you pull the teeth out of the woke scold playbook. And finally, fifth, it means living as free people. Not just talking about freedom, but actually practicing it, living by it. And that means taking personal responsibility seriously. It means showing that liberty and virtue can go hand in hand. It means being the kind of neighbor, parent, coworker, or friend who proves that a free society isn't chaotic. It's stronger when it's rooted in values, not government mandates. The best argument against the woke scolds isn't just words, it's living proof. See, the woke scolds, they're not going to go down without a fight. They're going to cling to whatever power they can. They're going to keep screaming. They're going to keep shaming. They're going to keep trying to intimidate people into silence. But the difference now is that their spell is broken. People aren't scared anymore. People are laughing at them, and people are tuning them out. And when a moral movement loses its ability to scare people, it's all done. So my call to action to you is don't let this moment pass. Please don't wait for someone else to step up. Be the person in your circle who speaks truth without fear. Be the one who knows that you can reject woke nonsense without becoming bitter or cruel, and then be the one who rebuilds trust in community, in responsibility, in common sense. Because if enough of us do that, the woke scolds don't just die, they'll stay dead. The death of the woke scold isn't just about tearing down hypocrisy. It's about what comes next. And what comes next is up to us. We can either slide back into apathy and let the next ideological fad roll in our live and let live mentality, or we can take this moment and anchor our society in something real again. So yeah, let's celebrate the fact that the moral hall monitors are losing their grip. But let's also remember that liberty without virtue collapses into chaos. Virtue, enforced by government, collapses into tyranny. And the only way forward, is liberty rooted in responsibility, culture rooted in truth, and people brave enough to live it out. That's how we rebuild. That's how we win. And that's how we make sure the woke scolds never rise again. All right, folks. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and put a pin in today's episode. If you got some value, please go ahead and give it a share. When you do, tag yours truly at @BNicholsLiberty on X, Facebook, and Instagram. If you want to watch The Brian Nichols Show, head over to your favorite YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, or Facebook apps. Hit that subscribe button, and of course, hit that little notification bell so you don't miss a single time we have a brand new episode going live. Or if you'd like to catch your podcasts on the go, head to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or whatever it is you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe, and of course, check out all 1,000 plus episodes we have here of The Brian Nichols Show. And one final ask, and that is if you want to support the show, support us by supporting the folks who do support us, and that is our phenomenal sponsors like Cardio Miracle. Scan that little QR code over my shoulder or simply head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. You'll see a little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols. And with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.